To live with terror etched into your soul must be the purest definition of enslavement. It is the truth of their existence, a whisper given form. Specters of alchemy drawn from liquid moonlight, their veins flowing not with blood, but with quicksilver. They are not born but made. Homunculi conceived in the fever dream of an alchemist, forever shackled to the ambitions of their creators. Their tale is not one of glory, but a somber ballad of a people deemed less than whole, a people searching for a soul in a world that insists they have none, leaving trails of their silvery essence like tears on the uncaring earth. They are the Albinaurics. Before we start, I just want to say, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you give it a like. And if you enjoy my lengthy discussions on various lore subjects, please think about subscribing. It would help me out a lot, and I find it really endearing. There are a catalog of stuff you can go through in my channel, and should you wish to support the channel, I have recently opened membership where you can support me with less than $2 a month. However, I am grateful to you all whether you join or not, and this channel's content shall remain same for all regardless. And with that out of the way, let's continue. My opinion is, to truly understand the sorrowful story of the Albinaurics, we must first grasp the grand and singular ambition of their creators, the Nox. Their ultimate aim is to overthrow the Golden Order and bring about an age of stars, ushered in by their own Lord of Night. This goal is the driving force behind all of their profane experiments. The Dragonkin Soldiers and their lifelike puppets are new weapons to wield against the greater will. But the creation of a new life form is the most direct and audacious step in their plan, an attempt to artificially birth their new god through their own forbidden knowledge. This is where the story of the Albinaurics begins. My theory starts with their fundamental identity. They are artificial life forms, artifacts brought forth from shimmering pools of silver. This fact, established by items like the Albinauric blood clot, frames them as impure beings, wholly disconnected from the Erdtree's natural life cycle. It is clear to me that they are a connected line of work that also resulted in the Nox's foundational creations, the Silver Tears, especially given their shared silver blood. I even believe item placement in the game suggests a kinship between them, as a larval tear can be found among Albinauric corpses in their ruined village. This connection is further solidified by a previous item description in which the Albinaurics were originally named, the Children of Silver, which, to me, ties everything together. The Nox's mastery over this liquid silver evolved from the simple silver tears to the far more sophisticated mimic tear, proving their total command over this form of artificial life. To truly grasp their nature, I think it is helpful to look at real-world alchemy, specifically the theory of the tria prima, or the three primes: salt, representing the body, sulfur, representing the soul, and mercury, representing the mind or spirit in its fluid state. In this framework, every natural being possesses an aspect of all three. When we look at the creations of the Nox, with their heavy association with liquid silver, it seems perfectly clear to me that their working material is a mercurial one. This then begs a crucial question. If the Albinaurics are mercurial beings, are they missing one of the other primes? Do they have a soul? To me, this alchemical imbalance would provide a deeper, philosophical understanding as to why they are seen as so impure and incomplete by the world. An incomplete formula, however, needs a catalyst. There is one other aspect of their creation that I feel we must touch on: the primordial dew mentioned in the Albinauric shield's description. I do not think this is just a flowery phrase. I believe it is a critical clue. I am, of course, referring to the sacred dew that dripped as life-giving sap from the boughs of the Erdtree in the ancient age of plenty, given that the word primordial is also used to describe that ancient era. There is a very good chance in my mind that the primordial dew used in the Albinaurics formation was a stolen droplet of this very same Erdtree sap, used as a divine spark to bring life to the otherwise inert mercurial beings. This brings me back to the intended purpose of their creation. Alchemy's influence is all over this world, and one of its most fascinating concepts is the homunculus, the pursuit of creating a perfectly formed, miniature human being. This concept seems like the perfect solution for a society like the Nox, who sought to create their Lord of Night by any means necessary. And so it is my belief that the Nox, using their mercurial silver and stolen primordial dew, tried to alchemically create their own perfect being, their sovereign eternal. Instead, their grand endeavor culminated in a flawed yet sentient creation, the Albinaurics. This is my most logical speculation, and it fits perfectly with why the Albinaurics are so reviled. Their very existence is antithetical to the Golden Order, a fitting creation for a civilization in direct opposition to the greater will. They are living proof of a profane science and a rebellious ambition, born of silver and stolen divinity. Everything about their origins thematically points to them being a Nox creation in a grand, failed attempt to birth a new god. Now, while I consider the Nox to be the most logical progenitors of Albinauric society, I do, of course, acknowledge that there is another connection that we have to consider. And so, it is time to address the various Raya-Lucarian connections. While the game never explicitly states that the silver tears are artificial life, I believe the evidence, both in-game and from cut content, makes a compelling case. Their alchemical, substance-like form and presence in the Eternal Cities already point to the Nox, who were master experimenters in life and fate. The key in-game clue, for me, comes from the silver tear husk. Its description ends with an incredibly pointed statement: perhaps one day it will be reborn a lord. This perfectly mirrors the overarching goal of the Nox, who live in eternal anticipation of their Lord of Night. I see this as a direct link, framing the silver tears as an alchemical attempt to create a life form that could one day mimic and become the very god their creators await. If these in-game hints are not enough, a cut questline involving a sentient mimic named Asemi makes this intention crystal clear. In this quest, Asemi would have bonded with the player to slowly copy their form, with the ultimate goal of becoming their sovereign eternal once the player became Elden Lord. This narrative aligns perfectly with the purpose hinted at in the silver tear husk. As part of her quest, Asemi would have asked the player to find something called Cradle of My Kind, a mother chalice that is suffused with the blessed wonders of the stars. For me, this cut dialogue is incredibly revealing. The concept of a mother chalice points to a single alchemical point of origin for the silver tears. The description of it being suffused with the stars strongly suggests a liquid formula created by the Nox, who we know could distill the fate latent within the stars. This all leads me to a clear conclusion. The silver tears were an alchemical creation, born from a stare-infused formula in a grand experiment to artificially create their Lord of Night. With this understanding of the Nox's methods and ambitions, we can now turn our attention back to the Albinaurics, who are themselves artificial beings that bleed a silver formula. And my theory on the Albinaurics begins with their fundamental identity. They are artificial life forms. This fact, established by items like the Albinauric blood clot, immediately frames them as impure beings, wholly disconnected from the Erdtree's natural life cycle. Their artificial origin is the key to understanding them, and while it might seem mysterious, their own equipment provides powerful clues. Their ripple blade is explicitly modeled after her ripples, suggesting a liquid origin, while their blue-silver mail is crafted from the same metallurgical source as the archers who wear it. To me, the conclusion is clear. The Albinaurics are the product of alchemy, born from a liquid silver formula, a theory visually supported by the silvery blood they spill when struck. While this surface-level analysis is compelling, I believe we can pinpoint their creators by examining related lore and even cut content. Though looking at cut content requires caution, it can offer a valuable glimpse into the creator's original intent. A cut line of dialogue from Thops would have explicitly described the Albinaurics as accursed souls born of a forbidden rite of the Eternal City. This, in my opinion, makes perfect thematic sense, as the obsessive and profane experimentation of the Nox is well documented, leading me to believe they are the ones responsible. Even without that cut dialogue, I have always felt the Nox were the most logical creators of the Albinaurics due to their proven mastery of alchemy and life manipulation. As a people banished for conspiring against the greater will, their singular goal is to overthrow the current order and bring about their Lord of Night, providing a clear motive for their radical experiments. Their heresy is on full display in their creations. The Fingerslayer blade is a grotesque weapon formed from a corpse, designed for the sole purpose of killing gods. I see it as a deliberate and profane perversion of the divine process used to create weapons like the sacred relic sword, proving their willingness to corrupt the sacred to achieve their ends. The tragic Dragonkin Soldiers are another testament to their ambition, representing a failed attempt to hybridize and control the power of dragons. Their alchemical prowess is perhaps best seen in puppetry, an art they invented. This practice, continued by Seleucus, is revealed to be a form of alchemy that distills the fate latent within starlight to bind the will of others, even demigods. A similar creation, the Celestial Dew, is a night tier that uses this same power to manipulate causality and reverse past actions. To me, the evidence paints a clear picture. A society that can create god-slaying weapons from corpses and distill fate from the stars is more than capable of creating artificial life from liquid silver. This connection is further reinforced by another of their creations, the Silver Tears. These beings, a form of living liquid substance strikingly similar to Albinauric blood, offer more clues, and I believe that by reverse engineering their purpose, we can more fully understand the origin of the Albinaurics. In my opinion, the Carian royal line of Liurnia, led by the formidable matriarch Ranella of the Full Moon, either reached out to the Nox, or, as I am much more inclined to believe, they shared some kind of profound, pre-existing bond. The Carians are a lineage I find absolutely compelling. They rose from being simple astrologers in the high peaks to founding the legendary Rhea Lucarian Academy, which I personally envision as a sort of darker Hogwarts. The Carian noble house, as we know, it was truly established when its first matriarch brilliantly leveraged the power of an otherworldly moon to wrest control of the academy, an act that elevated her entire family to the status of nobility. Honestly, it's a story that feels like it was ripped directly from the pages of a manga I would read obsessively. Like any great story, however, this one is shrouded in mystery. I have to concede that the lore offers no explicit explanation of how the Carians and the Nox actually forged their alliance, which presents us with what I consider to be a delicious enigma. Even so, I find the ground for theorizing here to be exceptionally fertile soil for speculation. I find myself asking, could Ranella have been a chosen champion of the very same moon deity that the Nox held in reverence? Or perhaps that moon itself acted as a kind of cosmic signpost, guiding the Nox directly to her. The precise details might be lost to the ages, but the link between them is, in my eyes, utterly irrefutable. As I see it, the evidence is scattered all across the lands of Liurnia, the Carian home, which are strewn with the architectural and cultural remnants of a Nox society. What's more, it's clear to me that several key members of the Carian royal family demonstrated deep and intimate familiarity with Nox history and their very unique brand of technology. This deep-seated connection inevitably leads me to what I consider the most compelling piece of the puzzle, the origin of the Albinaurics. While I'll admit the Nox are a stronger thematic match for being the creators of the Albinaurics, I believe the undeniable connections to Liurnia are something that simply must be explored. For me, these links are glaringly obvious when you look at the Carian royal family's relationship with Albinaurics, their sheer number of them living in Liurnia, and an old, cut item description that, in my opinion, reveals the original intent by explicitly stating they were constructed in Rhea Lucaria. Even though this piece of lore was ultimately changed, it still hints at an original concept that continues to resonate with me. I would argue that the immense Albinauric population in Liurnia remains a powerful piece of evidence for their local creation, just as the physical location of the Silver Tears points directly to the Nox. My theory is further bolstered by the Albinauric shield, which makes a point of noting that sorcerers are their primary enemies, suggesting to me a history of conflict with their would-be Liurnian masters. This apparent conflict between creator and created only deepens the mystery, but I believe it makes perfect sense when you examine the profound cultural and magical overlap between the Carians and the Nox. The way I see it, their traditions show a truly significant degree of convergence. It's clear to me that both cultures dedicated themselves to studying the power and destiny held within the stars, and I find the Noxian influence in Liurnian places like the Church of Vows to be absolutely irrefutable. With this much cultural crossover, it strikes me as entirely plausible that the sorcerers of Liurnia either replicated or perhaps even advanced the Noxian experiments in the creation of artificial life. I feel this theory is cemented by the very existence of first-generation Albinaurics, such as Pidia and the Carian knight Loretta, who are known to have directly served the Carian royal family. With such strong evidence pointing to both Noxian origins and Carian involvement, the most logical conclusion for me isn't one or the other, but a synthesis of both. Ultimately, my personal belief is that the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. It seems probable to me that the Nox originated the process, but I'm convinced the Rhea Lucarians and the Carians took that foundational work and built upon it to create their own servants and soldiers. In my mind, this hybrid origin is the only way to satisfactorily explain both the strong thematic links to the Nox and the incredibly high concentration of Albinaurics found specifically in Liurnia. But regardless of their precise origin, the outcome strikes me as the same tragic story. These flawed beings were created by human hands for a purpose that has clearly failed, leaving them in a state of conflict with their former masters and persecuted all across the lands between. While the outcome for these beings is tragic, it's the sheer weight of those overlapping cultural details that brings my theory full circle and truly cements it for me. It's just too perfect that both societies engaged in a ritualistic consumption of the night tier as a way to atone for their transgressions. It seems to me that almost every significant Carian we meet is inextricably tied to the technological marvels of the Nox. Just consider Easy and his Nox mirror helm, Celavis and his eerily lifelike puppets, or Rani's profound knowledge of the eternal cities and the Finger Slayer blade. In my opinion, even the constant motif of silver in Carian sorcery, and the very design of Renala's own diadem, seem to be a direct echo of the pointed headdresses worn by Nox swordstresses. To top it all off, it appears to me that both the Nox and the Carians structured their societies around a matriarchal hierarchy. The conclusion feels inescapable to me. The Carians and the Nox were linked by their shared devotion to the moons and their affinity for silver. And it feels like a very small leap to assume that the Albinaurics were the product of Carian ambition powered by Nox science, created to be their servants. That, at least, is my personal interpretation. The Carians eventually mastered the knowledge passed down from the Nox to populate the world with Albinaurics. And one thing that must be said for the Carians is that they appeared to operate on a principle of equal opportunity. By all accounts, everyone under their dominion was treated with a measure of respect. Queen Renala even managed to recruit lesser giants to her cause, magically enhancing them into Carian knights who fought as equals alongside their human brethren. The Albinaurics, it seems, received a similar courtesy. A number of them were educated as apprentice sorcerers, and virtually all the females were bonded with direwolves to compensate for the eventual decay of their legs. These wolves were a powerful emblem of House Caria, a fact that I believe speaks volumes about their status. However, while their treatment may have been fair, I am convinced the Albinaurics had little real choice in their destiny. What other path was available to them? These were beings whose blood was silver, whose very lives were not a gift from the Golden Order, but a product of the heretical science of its dissenters. They were, for all intents and purposes, living, breathing silver, the antithesis of the Erdtree's gold. This fundamental opposition to the ruling order did not deter them from serving their Carian lords faithfully. Some were even elevated to the role of sorcery apprentices, and I must emphasize that this was not some cruel mockery, as it was for the demi-humans who were given a facsimile of magical training. Ultimately, many Albinaurics would find themselves in the direct service of a demigod, As for which demigod they served, that question, in my analysis, hinges entirely on which of the two distinct generations of Albinauric one is referring to. The first generation, I have deduced, was cursed with a tragically short lifespan, or at least their legs were. The inexorable fate for every first-gen Albinauric appears to be the gradual fading of their legs, followed by their death. This was an undeniable flaw in their design, one that I believe the Carians felt obligated to rectify. Their solution was the Gen 2 series of Albinaurics. These new models were profoundly different. They had the heads of frogs and seemed to lack the capacity for speech or the more complex cognitive abilities of their predecessors. Their legs, however, though thin and frail-looking, were permanent. It seems to me that in solving one issue, the Carians inadvertently created a host of new ones. These newer Albinaurics were unquestionably more resilient, but they were also, from what I've observed, profoundly unintelligent. Unlike their first-generation counterparts, I've seen nothing to suggest they can perform even the simplest of spells. Yet, under very specific conditions, they can manifest the ability to use incantations, but only after coming under the direct influence of a demigod. As the dedicated servants and protectors of the Carian royal family, it was their duty to fight beside their masters when the Academy eventually rose in rebellion. They were often thrown against the Academy's mercenary forces. After countless such battles, a Carian enchanted knight by the name of Loretta, who I harbor a strong suspicion was an Albinauric herself, could no longer abide the way her people were being used. She became convinced that the Albinaurics deserved a sanctuary, a homeland of their own. Her quest led her to Mikla's Haligtree, a choice that demanded a vow of unending service to the dreaming demigod. That vow, it must be said, was but the first step on what I can only imagine was an arduous and sanguinary pilgrimage. Her party of exiles, from what I can piece together, consisted mainly of the lethally skilled female Albinauric archers, mounted on the Carian direwolves that had replaced their legs, followed by a large host of second-generation Albinaurics. What I find particularly telling is the apparent absence of any first-generation males on this journey. Only the women made the trek. This leads me to believe that the males either have a much shorter lifespan than the females, or were simply not considered effective combatants. The women, in contrast, seem to model themselves after Loretta, sharing her preference for the bow. This proficiency, augmented by their chilling command of frost-based magic, transforms them into an incredibly effective military unit, their physical limitations notwithstanding. Yet, even with the numerical advantage provided by the second gens, the journey was, by all accounts, exceptionally violent, though they did ultimately reach their intended sanctuary. Those Albinaurics too frail to join this great migration were left behind to continue serving their Carian masters. Some remained as sorcerers, while others established a hidden settlement beneath the Moonlit altar, a village that would later be razed by the forces of Sir Gideon Offner, the All-Knowing. The inhabitants were almost completely slaughtered, although a handful of them managed to survive. It also strikes me that none of the more resilient Albinauric women seemed to live in this village, or indeed anywhere in Liurnia, with the exception of a single corpse found surrounded by second gens in the ruins of the Academy Gate town. Loretta, of course, is also in Liurnia, though she is found in the tragic state of being pinned to a cliffside. This hidden village was led by an individual named Albus, and when Loretta's contingent departed, a fragment of the medallion required to enter the Promised Land was left in the care of this fragile, elderly Albinauric. For these villagers, I imagine the concept of a Promised Land was little more than a bittersweet myth, and that medallion fragment was their sole physical link to their scattered kin, and a future they would never witness. Tragically for Albus and all who remained, I find a cruel twist of fate in the fact that this medallion fragment would be the catalyst for their village's annihilation. It was precisely the artifact that Sir Gideon the All-Knowing sought when he ordered the village burned to the ground. It is so profoundly star-crossed, their only symbol of a home they could never reach became the instrument of their destruction. And yet, in a stunning paradox, that same shard of the medallion would against all odds, become the key to the salvation of the entire Albinauric race. This fragment proved to be indispensable to the young Albinauric woman Loretta in her own quest. Her mission was to transport the birthing droplet from Liurnia to Philia, who awaited it in the consecrated snowfield, inside a desolate, abandoned church known as the Apostate Derelict. To accomplish her goal, she naturally required the aid of a tarnished to secure the other half of the medallion. This second piece, I surmise, was entrusted by Mikla to the commander of Castle Sol, a theory that holds water for me, given the presence of other Albinaurics at that location. In the end, it is Loretta's courageous journey that ensures the continuation of the Albinauric people. But what became of the original migrants to the consecrated snowfield? I can assure you it was no paradise that awaited them. I am certain they found nothing but hardship in the shadow of the halig tree and the frozen wastes that surrounded it. The journey itself had been devastating and had surely extracted a heavy price from Loretta's followers. Then, shortly after the Albinaurics had established a settlement at the halig tree, Mikla disappeared. The dreaming Empyrean was carved from his sacred tree and abducted by his half-brother, Mog, the Lord of Blood. Whether Mikla went willingly or not is still a matter of intense speculation, though it is debunked fairly popularly that he was taken against his will. This act, as one might expect, enraged a number of the second-generation Albinaurics. They set out to find their lost lord, only to somehow fall under the sway of and enter the service of Mog himself, the very entity who had kidnapped their master. It just goes to show how impressionable the second gens truly are. Having laid that rather extensive historical groundwork, I would now like to transition to my own personal compendium of the various Albinauric forms. It only seems right to begin with the first generation, just as the Carians did. A detail that has always struck me as deeply sorrowful is the visible decay of their legs. You can literally watch them fade into nothingness. This is perhaps most gruesomely apparent on the bodies that Gideon strung up like grotesque ornaments throughout the Albinauric village. The most frequently encountered first gens are what I tend to call the elders. In my view, they represent the standard, unmodified version of the male first gen, possessing no remarkable features. Our acquaintance Albus is one such elder, and he apparently served as the chieftain of the Albinauric village. I've observed countless identical individuals near the village entrance, though running is hardly the right term for their movement. It's more of a defensive crawl, as they lash out at any who approach, a reaction that is entirely justified given the recent atrocities committed against them. A brief tour of their village reveals a truly ghastly scene. Silver corpses and puddles of silver blood are everywhere, and dozens, if not hundreds, of Albinaurics have been hung from the trees, their decaying legs put on full, horrific display. These are, in essence, the baseline model of Albinauric. They do, however, have one subvariant that I find particularly pitiable. The cuffing Albinauric, located in the poisonous mire directly beneath the village. What makes these poor creatures distinct is that they have spent so long languishing in that toxic bog that they have become infused with its venom. This condition seems to come with considerable drawbacks, as they appear to be in perpetual agony, racked by violent, poison-filled coughs. My own hypothesis is that they came to be when Gideon's men simply tossed many of the slaughtered villagers from the cliff-top settlement into the swamp below. The alternative I've considered is that they were refugees who fled the massacre with nowhere else to turn, eventually becoming one with their toxic environment. Personally, I lean toward the theory that they were simply discarded by the invaders, though both scenarios are plausible. These wretched beings are draped in moss and tatters, and, as I mentioned, are constantly expelling a cloud of poison. To my knowledge, they are exclusive to that single poison swamp, and are found nowhere else in the lands between, though I am always open to being corrected on that point. A more widely distributed subvariant from my observations is the sorcerer types. Besides the magical staff they carry, this black hood is their sole distinguishing feature, and, I might add, yet another stylish piece of gear that the game's developers have chosen to withhold from us. These more gifted Albinaurics were instructed in the arcane arts by their Carian overseers and likely served in various capacities, most often as assistants. In the present day, however, most of them have been reduced to menial labor, acting as the janitors of Caria Manor. Consistent with what I perceive as a fundamentally sly nature, these sorcerer Albinaurics often feign death as a tactic to ambush trespassers in the manor. They also seem to have laid a series of magical Carian booby traps, making them little more than glorified caretakers. Celivis's apprentice, Pydia, is one such Albinauric, and a truly pathetic figure he is. His primary duty is to maintain the puppets, who clearly hold him in contempt, as they immediately murder him the moment Celivis is killed. One can find a number of these sorcerers at Caria Manor, and even Rykard at Volcano Manor kept a few in his service. One was even appointed as a torturer in one of his secret Inquisitor dungeons. What I find most unsettling is that they were sometimes commanded to torture their own kind, a task they apparently took to with a chilling enthusiasm. But not all of these sorcerers were so malevolent. Within the ruins of the Albinauric village, one of them appears to be orchestrating an evacuation, having collected as many of the elders as possible and herded them toward a bridge. Another seems to have successfully led a small group to a different bridge. At least, that is how I read the scene. Initially, when I saw the sorcerer with the large cluster of Albinaurics near the Homunculus, I assumed they were preparing an assault on the horned beast and his dogs. However, I soon realized they were all merely playing dead. My conclusion, therefore, is that the sorcerer has commanded the others to feign death on the bridge and simply wait for the Homunculus to depart. The other sorcerer appears to have had more success, managing to guide his charges into the sunlight, though it seems he only rescued one or two of the elders. So, at a minimum, I can say that the sorcerers in the village demonstrate a compassion entirely absent in their kin at Volcano Manor, who revels in torturing his own people. The subject of torture leads me directly to the next two subvariants of the male first-generation Albinauric, beginning with the disturbingly named Dumpling Heads. I see these as profoundly violent Albinaurics, distinguished by their swollen, hooded heads, who behave in a manner reminiscent of the brainsuckers from Bloodborne. They have been tortured into a state of madness, likely by other Albinaurics, and have been physically mutated through experimentation. Their mouths are monstrous maws filled with decaying teeth, a condition inflicted upon them for the sadistic pleasure of their tormentor, as the description of the Black Dumpling Hood suggests. They employ these teeth with a shocking brutality, ferociously cannibalizing any who are unfortunate enough to cross their path. These are, without question, the most menacing Albinaurics I've detailed thus far, and I would contend they are among the most dangerous of all Albinauric types. Fortunately, my experience has shown them to be something of a glass cannon. Provided you can avoid their relentless combos and their grab attack, they can be dispatched with relative ease, often falling after just a single blow or two. They are exclusively located at Volcano Manor, which is entirely fitting given the depraved nature of that location, and, more intriguingly, at Castle Sol, in the company of other Albinaurics who are also in a deplorable state. It is difficult for me to determine if they were ordinary first-gens when they were dispatched to Castle Sol, or if they were already victims of torture when Miklau chose to station them in that haunted fortress. The other type of Albinauric themed around torture would be the ones I refer to as the Screamers. These miserable creatures appear to be bound to pillars, and are frequently seen hanging from the rafters in both Castle Sol and Volcano Manor, awaiting the perfect moment to descend upon an unsuspecting victim. They possess the singular ability to emit a piercing shriek that draws the attention of all nearby enemies. The ones at Castle Sol, in particular, have a cunning trick where they seem to instantaneously summon the exile soldiers of the castle's garrison to their aid. My initial thought upon witnessing this was, are they living spirit-calling bells? I later concluded that they are not actually summoning them, but rather alerting them from other locations within the intensely haunted castle. Thus, I believe their primary function is to act as both sentries and a biological alarm system, With that, I think I have covered all the male first-generation Albinaurics, so let us turn our attention to the females. They truly only appear in one primary form, a form that I believe is instantly recognizable to most. I am, of course, referring to the Albinauric wolfback archers, though they are occasionally encountered dismounted. They are archers of exceptional skill who ride upon wolves, through which they can also channel ice magic. There is something about this that I find aesthetically brilliant. It is as if, for a fleeting instant, they merge their consciousness with their direwolf to exhale a blast of frigid air. And in keeping with the tradition of many archer-type enemies in this game, their arrows will actively track you, a fact you would do well to remember. The non-player character Loretta is, of course, one of these, as is the towering Albinauric woman named Philia, who makes her home in the apostate derelict. In my opinion, she is the progenitor of them all, the birthing mother from which all other first-generation Albinauric women are modeled. They are so clearly made in her image, even down to their identical armor. They are, in essence, her smaller duplicates. This is further supported by Loretta's questline, which concludes with the delivery of a birthing droplet directly into Philia's hands, that she is the birthing mother. I often find myself pondering if she might have been the original rider of that unusually powerful red wolf of Radagon that stalks the blizzards of the snowfield. It is a logical question. If Philia's legs had already wasted away, how on earth did she travel all the way to that remote location? I must conclude that this is, at the very least, a plausible theory. In any case, these Albinauric warrior women are found exclusively in the snowfield, with the notable exceptions of Loretta and the corpse in Liurnia. The great majority of them seem to be tasked with guarding the entrance to Ordina, the ruins of a former liturgical town which once served as the primary access point to the Halig Tree. Those who are not posted as sentries outside are stationed within the town itself. Those who are not posted as sentries outside are stationed within the town itself, where they serve alongside a contingent of Black Knife assassins as a formidable deterrent to any would-be trespassers into Mikla's domain. This Ordina Everjail represented the only true path to the Halig Tree. This fact strongly suggests to me that Mog must have discovered a way to circumvent this heavily trapped entrance. Or perhaps he found an alternative route entirely, a subject that I believe could be the basis for a very compelling analysis in its own right. The Albinauric women positioned inside the Everjail are equipped with bows that glow with an ethereal light, and they are all positioned strategically on rooftops, perfectly placed to assassinate you when you are least vigilant. It is a truly marvelous and deadly place. Furthermore, it appears these women share a kind of symbiotic relationship with their direwolf mounts, and the death of a wolf can have a devastating psychological effect on its rider, a phenomenon we witness directly with Loretta and her wolf, Lobo. I am still of the opinion that we should have been able to bury Loretta's ashes at the slumbering wolf's shack beside Lobo at the conclusion of her quest. It is the ending she so richly deserved. She was the savior of her people, and the very least we could have done was to reunite her ashes with her faithful companion. I believe that concludes my overview of the first-generation types, so let us now proceed to the frog-headed dullards, the second gens. The most prevalent type of second gen, whom I will simply refer to as the regulars, can be found in overwhelming numbers across Liurnia. They are typically armed with clubs, crescent-bladed polearms, and sometimes a shamshir or a distinctive ripple blade, which I surmise was crafted in homage to the silver birthing vats from which they emerged. Those who are bestowed with this particular weapon seem to me to be more naturally aligned with the arcane. They appear to use the blade as a kind of magical focus, enabling them to project a breath of icy, silver my saint. This attack bears a striking resemblance to the frost breath that their elder, first-generation sisters channel through their wolves. I've even noticed that their eyes seem to glow in a similar fashion. Some are clad in rags, others are attired like Shrek, and they are most commonly seen carrying crude shields fashioned from the waterlogged wood that is so abundant in Liurnia. Individually, I find them to be of little threat, But like the demihumans, they can become a serious problem when they swarm in large groups. They also have a few surprises in their arsenal. They can, for example, spit wads of swamp flame at you, and have perfected the spinning cartwheel attack made infamous by the bone wheels in Dark Souls 1. I would go so far as to say this cartwheel has become the signature maneuver of the second generation Albinaurics. Frequently seen leading these patrols of regulars is a large rot. These are larger, bare-chested Albinaurics who carry enormous wooden clubs that they also use as walking staves. In my observation, they tend to be significantly more vigilant than the smaller Albinaurics they command, so do not let their hulking appearance deceive you. They are surprisingly keen-eyed. These rots, both large and small, are scattered throughout Lernia, with a small number of the lesser ones having journeyed as far as the Mogwin dynasty, where they mingle with their transformed brethren, who, as my personal favorites, we will discuss later. But what of the second generation Albinaurics who undertook the Great Migration to the consecrated Snowfield? From what I've gathered, these Albinaurics came tantalizingly close to reaching the Haligtree itself, but ultimately settled just outside its boundaries, alongside their first generation wolf-riding sisters. These particular second-gen rags are distinguished by their eyes, which shine with the light of unalloyed gold. This transformation, I believe, is a result of their having embraced Mikla as their lord and master. Consequently, they have learned some new abilities, including the capacity to wield Golden Order incantations. These spells were devised by the slumbering demigod himself before he rejected the Golden Order due to its failure to cure his afflicted sister. I find it deeply ironic that these Albinaurics can use such sacred incantations, given that, from the perspective of the Erdtree, they are considered nothing more than soulless, profane automata, unworthy of its grace. Yet, it seems that with Mikla as their guide, anything is possible. These Albinaurics have also retained their signature cartwheel and their ability to expectorate swamp matter, but they have clearly been elevated by Mikla's formidable power. They possess the same skills as their smaller counterparts, and their primary duty appears to be leading patrols through the snow-swept landscape, likely still in search of the missing Mikla. And there are a couple more details about these stark white, Mikla-aligned Albinaurics that I neglected to mention. While the larger ones do indeed have the golden eyes, they do not seem to be able to cast any incantations. I am aware that the smaller ones can hurl those disgust-like projectiles, but I have always suspected that the larger ones possessed some kind of secret incantation. If they do, however, I have never been able to provoke them into using it. One particular detail I found noteworthy, armed with a ripple blade, who appeared to have dozed off in front of an arteria leaf. These are exceedingly rare plants, known for their ability to stir the blood, and are thus used as components in several empowering perfumes and are the key ingredient in exalted flesh. Their most significant association, however, is with blood, which sparked a thought in my mind. It strikes me as plausible that Mog could be using such methods to extend his influence, perhaps by hijacking Mikla's dream-walking abilities to subvert the Albinaurics while they sleep. I consider this a strong possibility, especially given Mikla's alter ego, Saint Trina, and her connection to slumber. This would imply that Mog never needed to physically interact with any of these Albinaurics to win them over to his cause. It is certainly a compelling theory that I intend to develop further. And now we arrive at the final subvariant, the Crimson Ones. These are scarlet-hued, devil-horned Albinaurics who carry the same equipment as the regulars, but have been gifted with a set of vicious new powers, an enhancement I attribute to the Formless Mother channeled through Mog's cursed blood. This was, in effect, their prize for pledging allegiance to the Lord of Blood. Among the new skills they acquired was an upgraded and more lethal cartwheel technique, now augmented with spikes formed from their own corrupted blood. They can also launch these spikes as projectiles at will, in a devastating attack that appears to cause as much pain to the user as it does to any unfortunate soul caught in its path. They have also developed the capacity to conceal themselves within pools of blood, a tactic they employ with terrifying effectiveness in the sanguine swamp of the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum, a skill I am certain they learned from the sanguine nobles. The crucible horns that have erupted from their skulls are, in my view, an unmistakable indication that they have been infused with the infamous cursed blood. They seem to be engaged in a territorial conflict with the monstrous, heavily infected crows that inhabit the area. I can only guess that the crows somehow migrated down from Caelid and were subsequently mutated by feasting on the numerous infected corpses that are littered with strange eggs. Some evidence of this war still remains, such as the sight of a massive, fallen raven surrounded by several crimson Albinaurics. At present, the two factions seem to have partitioned the blood swamp, while the infected dogs have, for some reason, chosen to remain neutral. Of course, my assertion of a conflict is purely speculative. However, it seems to me that the transformation of the birds was unintentional, whereas the Albinaurics actively chose to accept the Lord of Blood into their hearts, meaning they are not so much infected as they are converted. Mog's forces maintain a tight grip on this territory, and a large contingent of his Albinaurics can be seen either patrolling a great tree or attending the sermons of a sanguine noble, just outside Mog's private chambers. It is also significant that, although their blood now runs red, those wielding the ripple blade can still perform their silver mist attack. This tells me that they have not entirely severed the connection to their origins. The larger, horned rags are, to my mind, even more fascinating, and are found only in the eerie woods that lead to the mausoleum. These immense, crimson Albinaurics stand as silent sentinels. They naturally possess all the same unique blood-based abilities as their smaller brethren, but what makes them truly formidable is the secret weapon they hold in reserve. In a manner similar to a tibia mariner, these larger red Albinaurics can summon a colossal skeletal entity, an avatar of bone capable of unleashing a devastating hyperbeam of ghost flame. What I find most amusing is the method of summoning. They appear to blow into their great curved club as if it were a trumpet, a ghost horn, perhaps, which calls forth this gigantic skeleton from the spirit world. What's also quite comical is that the Albinauric summoner is vulnerable to the skeleton's attacks, allowing a cunning adversary to trick the skeleton into killing its own master. It is difficult for me to explain why an upgrade from the Formless Mother would bestow such an ability. My best guess is that there must be some esoteric link between the Blood Star and the ancient, bird-themed rituals of death. All their other new powers, the blood spikes, the blood cartwheel, are perfectly consistent with their allegiance to the Lord of Blood. But the summoning of a giant spirit skeleton, that is unquestionably death magic and ancient death magic at that. I am convinced there must be a connection there. These converted, blood-red Albinaurics are found only at the Dynasty Mausoleum and guarding the portal to it in the consecrated snowfield. This placement suggests to me that they were left behind by Mog to either convert more of their kind or to simply stand guard over the hidden entrance to his profane sanctuary. In my opinion, to truly understand the visceral hatred faced by the Albinaurics, we must begin with one of the cruelest items in the game, the Albinauric pot, a weapon crafted from their own blood. The item's description serves as a declaration of contempt from their persecutors, the Knights of the Cuckoos. Behold, thy defiled blood, unlike any humor that flows in our grand realm. This single sentence captures the core of the prejudice against them. Their very essence is seen as defiled, unnatural, and alien to the established order of the lands between. This belief that they are not natural beings seems to be the foundational justification for their endless mistreatment, as they are not even viewed as living creatures worthy of basic consideration. This concept is deeply embedded in their very name. I think it's worth analyzing the etymology of Albinaurics to see just how fitting it is. Alban most directly translates to white, but it can also imply a lack of color or pigment. Auric, of course, means gold. Therefore, the most likely intended meaning, in my view, is without gold. They are pale beings defined by an absence, the absence of the golden grace of the Erdtree. This ties directly back to the idea that they are artificial, lacking that essential third aspect, the soul, the divine touch that marks all true life in this world. This lack of gold is precisely what makes them so hated. They are a visible and constant reminder of something outside the sacred order. This institutional prejudice finds its most active enforcers in the Knights of the Cuckoo, the soldiers contracted to serve the Raya Lucarian Academy. These forces have a sinister reputation. As described in their ashes, they were given free rein by the Academy to wage war as they pleased, and they were infamous for their rapacious ways. The inherent cruelty of these soldiers lends itself perfectly to the grim narrative told by the Albinauric pot. While their conflict is partly driven by territory, as the Albinaurics occupy much of Liurnia, it wouldn't be hard for me to imagine that these Cuckoo forces need very little encouragement to visit atrocities upon a people they already see as subhuman, likely taking a perverse pleasure in their work. This is further reinforced by the Albinauric shield, which notes that sorcerers are their main enemies, clearly denoting this ongoing conflict with Raya Lucaria. The most harrowing and stark example of this dehumanization, however, is the massacre at the village of the Albinaurics. When we first arrive, we are greeted by a grisly and stomach-churning scene of genocide. The corpses of Albinaurics are hanging from trees and piled high in smoldering pyres. Nephili's haunting words as we enter capture the atmosphere perfectly. The oppression of the weak, pillage unchecked. We soon discover that the perpetrators of this atrocity are the men of Gideon Offner. This revelation is a shocking betrayal, especially through the eyes of his adoptive daughter, Nephili, who realizes the hypocrisy of the man she once admired.
And I can no longer trust in father. To think he'd order his men to enact such tragedy. Where is the justice he purports in that? He once told me that if he became Elden Lord, he would never allow the downtrodden to be cheated ever again. Was he simply lying to me?
Gideon's motivation, in my view, is disgustingly petty and reveals the depths of his narcissism. He is obsessed with his own legend as the all-knowing, and he cannot stand the thought of a secret he does not possess. He expresses his frustration openly, noting how vexing that the all-knowing didn't have the full story. Before employing our services, he used his own men to torture the Albinaurics, killing Latenna's wolf and burning her entire village to the ground, all to find the location of the Halig tree. It is a breathtakingly casual disregard for life, and it shows me just how lowly some people consider Albinaurics, that Gideon weighs the existence of an entire community as worth less than a simple piece of information to satisfy his ego. This treatment of Albinaurics as a mere resource, rather than a people, is echoed in the chilling cruelty of Praetor Rykard. The prison town at Volcano Manor is a testament to his insanity, a place where he evidently experiments on countless life forms for his blasphemous vision of overthrowing the Erd tree. Within the ironically named guesthouse, we find a large population of Albinaurics subjected to horrific circumstances. They are trapped in various torture devices, including the truly cruel Black Dumpling, a mask that makes the wearer go insane. These wretched, tortured souls are some of the most pitiful enemies you can face. It is also here that we find the Albinauric mask, an item whose description carries a very clear and dark implication. It is a mask made from the skin of an Albinauric. The text reads, "A far cry from Godskin." This Albinauric hide mask is the product of malicious mockery. The implication for me is that an Albinauric was skinned by a godskin, which makes perfect sense given the presence of a godskin noble in the nearby temple. While this boss might feel random to some, I believe it is a deliberate choice. The Godskin and Rykard are allies of convenience, both wishing to overthrow the gods. The Godskin noble gets access to plenty of subjects for its grim hobby, and in return, Rykard gains the Godskin's knowledge of blending life, as the nobles are said to have, assimilated in human physiology, including serpentine features. So why are the Albinaurics the primary victims here? In my opinion, it is because they too are artificial beings. For someone like Rykard, looking to create his own man-serpent life forms, why not start with the creations of the Nox, another society that sought to overthrow the gods? As beings made from an alchemical formula, reverse engineering the Albinaurics could be the key for Rykard to unlock the secrets of creating his own army. This is my speculation, but I believe it is the story that the prison town is trying to tell us. What is most important is the further illustration of the senseless harm inflicted upon them, seemingly without care or thought. Human conflicts are at least memorialized in sword monuments, but Albinaurics are treated as though they are not really living, sentient beings at all. Their dehumanization is one of the most brutal stories in the lands between, and its core is found in that first principle. Because they are outside the Erdtree's order, they are not even seen as real life. While Liurnia serves as the main hub of Albinauric activity in the lands between, we do find them in other, more surprising locations. One of the most fascinating of these is Mogwyn Palace, where a faction of them appears to be in service to the Lord of Blood. I find the story of these wayward Albinaurics to be particularly interesting because it tells us so much about their people, revealing not only secrets about their physical nature, but also the sheer depths of their desperation. The Mogwyn dynasty masterfully presents itself as a haven of love and acceptance, a sanctuary for those who have no place within the Golden Order's world of grace. This message is given a veneer of legitimacy by the fact that Mog himself is an omen, a being unwelcome and reviled by that same world. He is, in a sense, the king of the outcasts, so it is little wonder to me that a people as persecuted as the Albinaurics might feel drawn to such a figure and his promises. This powerful draw is hinted at in the world itself. In Liurnia, near the Rose Church, which serves as a center of the Formless Mother's influence, one can find a group of Albinaurics staring curiously at the structure, as if they are being called to it, and are contemplating joining Mog's new dynasty. We see a similar scene in the consecrated snowfield, where a lone Albinauric stands perilously close to the bloody portal that leads directly to Mogwyn Palace. It's clear they are being tempted by a promise of belonging, a promise that requires a covenant bound in blood. When we, the player, form our own pact, Vare seems to inject us with something, and we receive the bloody finger in return. The description is telling. Glistening blood has been siphoned into the nail of this finger. The nail still aches with sweetest pain. In my view, this isn't just an item, it is our own finger, afflicted by a transfusion that binds us to Mog, turning our eyes a cloudy red. I believe the blood siphoned into us is the accursed omen blood of Mog himself. Vare's own words after the ceremony seem to confirm this for me. He tells us, "Never forget that feeling of agony, for it is what binds you to Luminary Mog, to all of us. I am convinced it binds us to Mog because it is literally his blood now running through our veins. It binds us to the entire dynasty, as we all now share in the same omen curse. We can see the physical effects of this on the dynasty's sanguine nobles who, like Mog, have pale skin and sprout omen horns. With this understanding of the induction process, let us turn our attention back to the Albinaurics, as it appears many of them have taken up this dark offer. In the consecrated snowfield, a promised land for their people, some seem to forsake the path to Mikla and instead find their way to that blood-covered portal. Near the portal's cliffside location, we witness a truly interesting scene, a group of blood-red Albinaurics patrolling a group of regular, pale Albinaurics. To me, the story this scene tells couldn't be clearer. These are new inductees, being guarded before they too are accepted into the dynasty and subjected to the same bloody transformation. They are a people who have been hunted and brutalized their entire lives, and they finally believe they have found a real sanctuary. But while Mog preaches a gospel of love, it is clear to me that he cares as little for the Albinaurics as the rest of the lands between. If one looks carefully at the environmental details in Mogwyn Palace, you are confronted by a horrific sight. Albinauric corpses are strewn carelessly everywhere, left to rot and soak in the bloody bogs with no care for dignity or burial. The storytelling here is unambiguous. Not all Albinaurics who make it here will survive the induction process, and the callous treatment of their dead speaks volumes about Mog's real feelings towards them. He only cares for them as shock troopers, and I think this highlights the sad reality of their existence. They are simple, trusting beings, and while we cannot blame them for seeking refuge in the only place that seems to offer it, it is clear that Mog callously abuses that trust. Let us look at what the transformed blood Albinaurics can tell us about their people in general. When you look at them, they are not only distinguished by their bright red skin, like the sanguine nobles, they also have small omen horns poking through the tops of their heads. This, again, suggests to me that those who join the dynasty go through the same process we do. They have Mog's omen blood injected into them. The radical nature of their transformation, however, is what I find most interesting. On humans, the effect is like a corruption or an infection, but on Albinaurics, it is akin to a complete palette change. This makes perfect sense to me, however, when we consider the alchemical origins of the Albinaurics that we discussed previously. I see it as them being uniquely malleable. They are still formulaic beings, in a way. By adding a new, potent element like omen blood to their formula, it drastically alters their entire composition, much as adding a new ingredient would change a potion. We also have to consider their innate arcaneness, which might cause their bodies to react far more dramatically to the omen curse than a mundane human body would. This is not the only instance of such a transformation. In the consecrated snowfield, we can also find golden-eyed Albinaurics who follow Mikla. While we don't know for certain what caused their change, a good educated guess in my mind is that they were exposed to Mikla's unalloyed gold. With that said, it is to these promised lands that we turn to next to discuss the future of the Albinauric peoples and their heroes, Loretta and Loretta. And so, in the face of relentless persecution, it is little wonder to me that the Albinaurics cling to a promised land story, a desperate hope for a future free from suffering. We hear of this firsthand from old Albus, who entrusts us with the fate of Loretta, a young woman chosen to fulfill their people's purpose. She is the living embodiment of their hope, on a sacred quest to reach Mikla's Haligtree, a sanctuary she must reach at all costs. This haven was discovered for them by Loretta, a fabled Carian knight, and in my opinion, one of the story's greatest heroes. Her armor tells of how she abandoned her post and journeyed to find a safe home for the Albinaurics, eventually settling on the Haligtree. I believe her motivation was deeply personal, stemming from the absurd rumor that she herself was an Albinauric. To me, this is no rumor. Her perpetually mounted state suggests the same leg infirmity as the first generation, and her magic is a far more potent version of the Albinauric archer's own sorcery. I am convinced that she is one of them, which explains the incredible lengths she went to in order to save her people. The Haligtree was a fitting choice, a sanctuary under the protection of the Empyrean Mikla, who was well known for extending his grace to the lonely and the meek. It is here that the Albinaurics made a new home, guarding the path to the Haligtree in exchange for a life of peace. Loretta's quest was not to find this place, but to return to it. Her journey was a homecoming, as she had traveled from the Haligtree to Lernia to retrieve a sacred item known as the birthing Droplet. Upon her return, we witness one of the most powerful and hopeful moments in the entire game. Loretta presents the Droplet to a giant, slumbering Albinauric named Philia, securing the future of their entire race. The science behind this miracle is, of course, open to speculation, but I have my own theory. I believe Philia, whose name means love, serves as a new progenitor for her people, a mother figure akin to the one mentioned in old lore, created as a vessel for a new generation. Loretta brought her the final, critical ingredient, the birthing Droplet. I am in the belief that this life-giving substance is the sap of the Erd Tree itself. There is a beautiful, poetic justice in this. The Albinaurics were hated and brutalized for their lack of connection to the Erd Tree and its grace. It is perfectly fitting, then, that the sap of that very same tree is what ultimately grants them their salvation, allowing them to control their own destiny and bring about their own future. And so, from silver dreams they are born, flawed and forsaken, their very being a heresy against the golden light that governs the world. I see them not as abominations, but as the sorrowful children of a forgotten art, sired by the Nox who gazed at the stars from the bowels of the earth. They emerge from their nascent pools into a life of indentured servitude, their bodies destined to fail, their spirits forever bound to the will of Carian royalty or slumbering gods. Theirs is a history defined by a great journey, a violent pilgrimage toward a sanctuary that was never real, a frantic escape from a home that was never theirs. And in the final, cruelest stroke of fate, they stand sentinel at the threshold of Mog's blood-soaked kingdom, a mere whisper away from the silent, eternal cities of their own creators, forever within sight of their genesis, but eternally unable to return.